they face political challenges. So I want to move to this final bit by asking you some challenges and questions, I think. How do we respond to the cuts agenda that's coming? I think there's one response that's going to be very, very risk averse. There's going to be another one that just tries to get through this in a conservative status quo approach. There's going to be people, which we see in the government, that are going to use this for restoration, for getting things back on track with the fantasy island Britain bubble that existed under Blair and Brown. You can feel that the UK government figures on stamp duty projected in the future show that the recovery isn't based on exports, it's based on the return of the property bubble. And another way is surely of being more imaginative and challenging what got us into this mess, what made us the fourth most unequal country in the developed world. How do we think about public sector reform? Clearly, reform is going to happen. It's been happening. There's the KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers management consultancy version. How can a different version be made that is led by workers and consumers? There already are examples of this happening all over the UK. I know particularly of the example of Newcastle City Council, where they're ready to give it to management consultants, their IT services, and the Unison branch said, let us bid for this, creating a bid created by workers, and they won that bid. And there's lots of other examples. And I think particularly here, the research of John Clark, I think he's at Open University, I think is pivotal, where it's a project called something like the Citizen Consumer Project, where he took thousands of people's views on public service and thousands of workers. And what he found, after 30 years of new public management claptrap, is that people hate the terms, I think it's wonderful, people hate the terms customer and consumer. They absolutely detest them. And people want to be what is specific. They want to be a passenger, they want to be a patient, because they understand the context of those relationships. And I think that we've noticed intuitively that the whole efficiency model of public service, people want a model, because we have this a little bit in Scotland, we're having problems in our public services. We have an equity model in health, an equity model in education. We have all sorts of things about trade union conservatism and all sorts of other things, but we have those values still instilled, while of course having the sharks circling us basically. How do we cope with short-termism? We had the heaviest snow for 12 years in the winter, and local government gets it in the neck, the country is going to the dogs. We rightly blame the city and financial services for short-term. They are profoundly short-termist, but it seems life is increasingly becoming short-termist. You see this from funding, to media, to football managers even, to the public sector and public expectations, and a media that brave at wanting to find failure and show people up. I mean, the story of the last 13 years, I think, as someone who detests New Labour, is actually a richly complicated one. In a way, what we have to look at as we leave it is that the best we can do? Because there were achievements, particularly on child poverty and pensioner poverty. There were achievements in terms of public investment, while also eroding the public good. Is that the best we can do? How sustainable are some of those gains as we go through recession? How do we challenge the business model of organisations, or maybe even more the business mindset, the quasi-business model we all have to produce for funding? One of the nice things that happened in Glasgow 2020 was a whole pile of, we did 30 events across the city, 5,000 people. But one of the nice things that happened was also other spontaneous events and things just happened because of that. So several projects decided to absolutely just dump doing normal annual reports or evaluations and do storytelling exercises about what their future was, who were the kind of people they were engaging with. And I thought that was a particularly nice thing. Apart from we had lots of things like people built cardboard cities of the future and various kids groups. They built one where the nuclear power station was right in the centre of the city because they bought the Stalinist mythic in science is nuclear power is safe science, which was rather nice of them, I thought. They also had studied a previous version of the future that we thought we discredited. But how do we challenge? I think this is one of the things that we really are only beginning to understand. The last 30 years, and the last 13 years particularly, have seen a real fundamental shift in how we understand intelligence and knowledge, or how it is understood in institutions and public discourse. The last decade has seen the emergence of an in-language that is part of the new class talk. People who know how to talk the talk, people who define what success is, that's the right way to talk. And there's a wonderful word here I did not invent, that is the word blow-ovator. Blow-ovator is an unbelievably 1920s American word. And what it means is people who regard themselves as the centre of the universe, the master of the universe, that blow their own trumpet. And I think this is, again, something I came to late coming out of the sort of like being a bit of a moderniser early on, is that this age is absolutely shaped by shameless blow-ovators who are absolutely talking superficial claptrap, you know. And I'm thinking of people like, sometimes these people have, you know, some worth in them. Malcolm Gladwell, the tipping point. 3 people once told me after we brought Malcolm Gladwell over to Scotland, he was the greatest thinker of our time. I said, like, you know, he's not a real thinker. He's not bad. He's a populariser. He's a plagiariser. Greatest thinker. The people told me that, you know, what's his name? I've forgotten his name. The guy that did A Man and Boy, that was with Julie Burchill. Sorry about that. The other set of people, it's not the same set of people I'm incriminating. He told me that seriously Tony Parsons was the greatest British novelist of our times. I said, I don't read much fiction, but I know that's not true. Yeah. So the Malcolm Gladwells, the Anthony Giddens, who did start as a serious sociologist and ended up, you know, as Blair's courtier, and in a way, not in a way, completely think tankery. I mean, I've worked with them, I've not worked in their offices. Think tankery is part of the problem in that it's a model about access, it's a model about power, it's a model about who you know and playing up to often your, not often, usually your corporate sponsors. And part of the answer, I think, apart from it lying in story and how we explore that, is the difficult job of the creation of vessels, institutions, and even just spaces. Now, if you take America, the conservative movement in the US is profoundly powerful. We thought with the election of Obama and the crisis that Bush had managed to get, I mean, the conservative movement into, that we maybe managed to marginalise them. But no, they're back, you know, toxifying everything, making Obama, you know, look like, you know, making it difficult to govern. And what I think looks like a decent presidency, trying its best with all its flaws. It's a powerful movement of institutions, opinion, influence, think tanks, faith groups, etc. And I think it's not in the same ballpark at all, but there is at the moment emerging in this country a fledgling conservative movement. Taxpayers Alliance, Daily Telegraph, Daily Mail, Spectator. And that group, the points both in Britain and in the US, there's not really countervailing forces to that. The Obama lot thought they'd done it with daily costs and move on, but they were never about policy and ideas, they were about organisation. But in the UK, there's nothing. And what that lot are doing, I think, Taxpayers Alliance and so on, is they're absolutely doing what people do, is they're making use of this crisis. You'll never lose the opportunity of a crisis, as the Obama team said, and they never delivered on. And what they're doing is they're pushing through the second stage of the neoliberal revolution. I was speaking to I was speaking to someone senior in the Scottish Government last week who's speaking to the senior civil servants in Number 10. The Number 10 team are taking order every single thing in the United Kingdom, and particularly sadly for you in England, looking how to sell it. Mm-hmm. They're talking about selling the entire English road network. They're talking about selling the entire English canal system. You know, this is a firestorm. It's a fire sale basically, and you know it's awful on every single level, and it's awful in the sense of who do we have to trust to challenge this. And you know, it's a small, hesitant start, but creating institutions, projects, and spaces that the system doesn't own, that people can call their own, is the way to begin a start. Things that are not beholden to corporate groupthink and the official future. These can be temporary and time specific, like Glasgow 2020. We were at for 2 years. I mean, some of the funders thought we were going to run forever. Actually, when we finished the book, the regional development agency said, "What are you going to be doing now?" I said, "Well, that's it. You know, we'll do a report to you, and but we're not running it for the rest of our lives on you know 20 project funders. That you know the money we had basically a budget of half a new bus, basically. You know, not a budget of billions." And they can be engaging the system. I think we managed this very well, and I think it's a good model that others have done as well. Engaging the system that's sitting outside it, you know, trying not to be a frontal assault on them, but trying to push them, because as you know, in the system, not everyone actually is a monster, and people in some of those challenging places are looking at how they can think differently. There's local examples, clearly there's example London citizens talk about, Birmingham citizens, and there's national examples where things like Compass, I think, has done its best trying to challenge neoliberalism in the policy class and isn't a think tank, it's kind of quasi-campaigning group. So I think there is optimism in the Sentinels, and this is a point we found fundamentally in Glasgow 2020. For all its reach of money and resources, the official future didn't capture hearts and minds, and I think thank God for that. You know, is that what we found is in the whole city, the whole city spoke in the way of, you know, step change, drilling down, you know, modernising this, that, and the next thing. The head of the marketing bureau said, I thrash, he said this on an interview, I thrash and trash Bratislava and Warsaw every opportunity I get, in Prague, he said, because it's a war to the death. He said, and obviously his KPI report means that he has to like do that. You know, he said, I don't thrash Edinburgh because we're in the same game together. If we get the visitors to Edinburgh, we can get them, we're in the same game together. And I think he maybe was the only one believer in the official future we found. Everyone else, and he's well known for that, put it this way, he's one of only 2 people in the world that's done a one-to-one PowerPoint with me. You know that experience was you meet somebody for coffee and they show you a PowerPoint, you know, it's not good, it's not good. Another one was someone who worked for the World Bank, you know. And so I think that people have, they have felt they have no option but to embrace that language, that jargon, that set of values. You know, I've talked about modernising things in the past, and I've known lots of people that have done that. And then those people generally talk a different language personally. The strangers of all the jargon they use in their work situation, it's not how they talk to their kids. How are you modernising your homework? And I think, you know, talking about saying, can we talk in an authentic way? Can we talk the same way we do in private as we do in public, or with the same words? Yeah, and the same kind of sentiment. That would be a good start. And Scotland comes from, it's particularly pronounced in Scotland because we had, one point, not that long ago, a kind of socialist culture, which has long since dissipated, despite, you know, what others might, like Billy Bragg might think, long since weakened. And yet people have a memory of that, and so people acutely carry, I think, a kind of, you know, personal schizophrenia about facing 2 ways at the same time. And I think it's something lots of us all over the world navigate all the time. So I think it's wonderful. Despite all the propaganda, you know, people don't believe the model on public services. They hanker after a different set of values, and they didn't capture hearts and minds. We're kind of living in a system that must be like the Soviet Union in some like the early 60s or something, when it seemed all powerful, or maybe the early 80s before it all collapsed, you know. And just a couple of quick final points is, politics of resistance and defence are not, you know, getting back into the bunker, getting back into the barricade is not the answer. A rerun of the 1980s where we have less troops and foot soldiers on what passes for the left, it's not. It'd be like a bad film remake. It'd be like Police Academy 2 rather than Police Academy 1, that classic, you know. It's time for imagination, it's time for play, it's time for story. I'm obviously from the left, I belong to the left, I'm thinking right on left issues, but I think it's maybe time for thinking beyond the left. The left's only half the story of humanity. It's a tribal thing. It's a time for maybe even, you know, ditching things like modernism and thinking about humanity, because some of the challenges we face are so profound. The official future, you know, version is like we have to have 9 planets to live on. PricewaterhouseCoopers version of the world has an India in 2050 40 times the size of its GDP today. I mean, it's just not possible. And I think on some way the big society is, you know, it's window dressing, all those things, but it's an opening into politics isn't necessarily about the state and the free market. In Scotland, what we're exploring a little bit is about, we have got self-government politically, but how do we move on to kind of idea of self-determination as a society? And there's stuff around very interesting American psychological research around self-determination in terms of like individuals, what kind of social and environmental and economic environment do people need to basically flourish and prosper? And it's about a decent society, it's about the meaningful life. And that's what I think could be the potential of a different version of the big society. So, thank you.